What are your thoughts about Chronicle having a female lead?
Oh, yeah, you sent me that article. I would not have anticipated Chronicle getting any kind of follow-up, so I'm honestly, like, open to it, I guess. Like,
wasn't it rumored, though, that there was always going to be a follow-up, but they just didn't have time or didn't have the right people behind it?
No, honestly, I think it was both Max Landis getting canceled and also, what's his name from Fan Four Stick? His career going in the toilet as well, but for different reasons.
Josh Trank?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what I mean. Like, not the right people behind it. They didn't have anybody who could, I guess, make a sequel or prequel or continue on with it. Because there was a lot of interest. If I remember correctly, there was a lot of interest right after its release about turning it into like some sort of series or
yeah. No, it was a sleeper hit. I mean, I remember us talking about it at the time, and then, mainline critics were also pointing out that like nobody saw the kind of surprise popularity of it coming.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it worked out really well in that it was one of the rare examples of like a found footage movie combined with something that was really popular or becoming even ever more popular at the time, superhero movies. And the fact that it could combine those two ideas and make it good, plus like some up and coming young talent, I think it was like lightning in a bottle. And I think, they could potentially go back into it. I think they always probably wanted to do a sequel with the original behind the scenes people.
I hope it's a continuation of the story in the first movie and not just like another story set in the same universe. I hate it when they do that.
Yeah, honestly, I have no idea how they would approach it. I mean, is it like a development announcement or like how far along in the process are they?
Well, who knows? Like, this could just kind of wither away in development hell and never come to fruition.
Right.
But I mean, it's the first time I've heard anything about Chronicle and since it came out, really. And I figured you'd be interested because you're like a big fan of the movie, and I was too.
Yeah. I mean, I really liked it at the time. I thought it was like a kind of like an incubator of sorts for talent. Like, it was one of the first times people had seen Dane DeHaan and Michael B. Jordan, Josh Trank, obviously, Max Landis. Obviously, Landis is kind of a terrible person, or a lot a terrible person. So, the gamble didn't pay off on all fronts, but so it's good that you brought that up, actually, because we are going to be talking about spin-off superhero stuff in this episode, along with other things, but why don't we just get into it? Welcome to episode 97 of the Extra Buttery Podcast, a free-flowing conversation between two guys who love movies and TV. My name is Robert Snow in Toronto. I'm joined by my co-host Jason Chen in Vancouver. And this time on the show, we're going to be talking about three movies. First up, the latest DC superhero / supervillain team up, The Suicide Squad. Not Suicide Squad 2016, but The Suicide Squad. Then we will get into the new film from David Lowery, The Green Knight. And we'll finish it off with a little bit of discussion on Zola, a movie that hit Sundance way back before the pandemic and was sadly delayed, but finally hit theaters a few weeks ago. And we both had a chance to see it, so we'll cram in a bit of chatter on that right towards the end. But switching back to the genre we were kind of getting into in the cold open there, superhero, supervillain, comic book stuff. I noticed on Letterboxd that you only gave The Suicide Squad 3 out of 5, which feels a little bit harsh, if I'm being honest. I mean, I know you come in below me on a regular basis, but you came in a full star below me. 3 out of 5, I gave it 4 out of 5. So you got to explain yourself. Like, if the original Suicide Squad in my books is like, I don't know, 1.5 to 2 out of 5, and this new one is 4, like what would this new version have had to do to get you really on board with it?
Okay, well, I gotta say, like, I don't get the hype.
Oh, interesting.
You could definitely feel like the Guardians of the Galaxy kind of vibe to it. I definitely think the music is too on the nose. I think it was fine in its execution, but I don't see it as anything really it doesn't really stand out in any way to me.
Let's meet your team.
It's okay, I'm not okay.
Each member is chosen for his or her own completely unique set of abilities.
I need to feel the raindrops on my head.
Hey guys, sorry I'm late. Had to go number 2.
Good to know.
And having established that I was a certain amount more positive than you on this, I mean, I vividly remember seeing the original one, even though the movie itself is just like a blob in my memory. The editing specifically was one of my huge pain points with that movie.
Yeah.
And I think you could add the horrible soundtrack selections to that same kind of general critique, but it was so atrocious, worse even than some of the other stuff that DC was getting lampooned for at the time, like Batman v Superman and things like that. Like, the construction of it was so bad that coming into this, even though it did obviously had a lot of those James Gunn touches that you pointed out, I still think it improved on the concept so much and fully embraced what the premise is, these ex-cons with various powers or abilities being sent into these missions where they're probably going to die. Like, it hit all of those things in such a consistent way that it really was what I think we all wanted from the original David Ayer one back in 2016.
I don't give it bonus points for being better than the original, because that's not a high bar.
Okay.
Like, for me,
right.
I think the execution was fine, but it didn't stand out anyway. So I didn't find it that funny. Some of the jokes landed, some of them didn't. I don't particularly find comic gore that interesting to me, visually or otherwise. I thought the best part of the movie was the first scene, the beach raid, where it really sets the tone for the movie. But the rest of it felt like any other superhero film. The final villain, as it's spoiled in the trailer, is a giant kaiju monster.
Right.
I think you get the reluctant leader hero in Idris Elba. You get these side characters who I think are much more interesting and end up stealing the show, especially Polka Dot Man. But again, I don't think just because it's so much better than the original, which honestly was pretty atrocious, I'd give it bonus points. I think in the grand scheme of DCEU films, I don't know if it's more, I definitely don't think it's more entertaining than something like Aquaman.
No, that's fair. I would, I think to me, Aquaman is still the highest in terms of like overall entertainment value.
Well, let me ask you this. What makes the Suicide Squad so good? Like, what does it do that's so different from all the other good superhero films out there?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, how does it stand out? I that's the thing I didn't get.
Let's lay the groundwork then. So
okay, good. I like it. We're getting into this.
Yeah. So the groundwork then for people who have only been, if you're the kind of person who only kind of touches down in the superhero genre every so often, you don't really get caught up in the continuity. This is the second attempt at the Suicide Squad narrative. It's unclear exactly from this movie whether it's a sequel per se to the original 2016 one, which was so derided by critics and fans, or if it's more of a soft reboot. But either way, we are getting a few of the same characters from the first attempt in 2016, along with a whole host of new ones. And the setup is the same, wherein all of these people are superpowered or very skilled individuals who are all in prison in Belle Reve Correction Facility in Louisiana for various crimes that, they've probably been put there by some of your favorite DC superheroes. And the US government recruits them kind of against their will, implants a exploding tracker thingy into their neck, which they can control remotely, and compel them to take on these suicide missions with various outcomes. And if they are successful, they will get 10 years off their sentence. So this new one starts with, it throws us right into the action, unlike the last time around, where the Suicide Squad is trying to infiltrate this South American island nation of Corto Maltese, which has undergone a military coup, and Amanda Waller, played by Viola Davis, has informed the various members of the Suicide Squad that they have to get in, figure out what's going on, and topple this military coup before it can possibly threaten the US or the world at large. And then, of course, if you've seen any James Gunn movies, you know that there'll be lots of comical hijinks and possibly violent encounters that follow. He's been given an R rating this time, or the freedom of an R rating, so he can chase some of the kind of visuals that he's not allowed to include in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And so I think it's that, getting back to your original question, we are getting more freedom for James Gunn to kind of go back to the sorts of movies he made before he joined Marvel. And he can tell, you know, more adult jokes. He can show more violence. He can, you know, give the material what it probably deserves, which I think some of us hoped for when the original was put out in 2016. And you're right that, you know, you can't really give the movie bonus points just because it's better than the first one. But I don't know. I think it delivers on the original concept, even if the first one didn't exist. You know, if you're thinking about a team of terrible people who are sent to do a horrible job, or who are sent to do a very dangerous job, and by the end of it, you're supposed to sort of see them as anti-heroes, despite them being like serial killers or, you know, horrible criminals. You know, if by the end of it you can empathize with them a little bit, then the movie has succeeded in some way. Yeah, that's kind of my take on it. But I 100% agree with you, though, that compared to, say, the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, this is less funny in a laugh out loud sort of way. So I did go in expecting more of the Guardians style jokes, and I didn't get that. So,
well, I was going to say, I think Guardians of the Galaxy had more to play with. Different worlds, different universes, set in space, different creatures. Meanwhile, in Suicide Squad, you're limited to one setting and this group of ragtag heroes that seem very familiar. I will just say one more thing, is that exploding tracker thingy. I like that description. Very apt, very descriptive. The entire time I'm watching this, and there's that extended scene where Harley Quinn escapes from her prison, quote unquote. That part in particular, but the entire movie, felt to me like Birds of Prey. It was fine. It was well executed. There are parts that are good. Not every joke landed. And so that's kind of where I landed. I liked Birds of Prey, but I didn't love it. And it seems like every critic and every person I know is head over heels with this film. And I just don't get it. Maybe it's just me, but I didn't feel it stood out in any way, shape, or form. I didn't feel like anything was particularly fresh. I think the treatment of the certain characters were really good. So like Peacemaker was really good, and how they did away with Boomerang in the first part was really good, because it kind of signifies that all bets are off.
Right. Even if you're a character from the previous film, you don't necessarily have plot armor. I mean,
exactly.
The movie gets lots of points from me on that score, because it, you know, they had talked about that being a possible consequence originally, or even in the comic, if you want to go back that far. And the original movie didn't deliver on that hardly at all.
And the most important part of any superhero film, in my opinion, or one of the most important, is how interesting is the villain. To me, the Suicide Squad had a very generic villain. I thought the Starfish was kind of fun to watch for about a minute. Then I got really sick of it. The Dictator was, I think, like a mustache twirler.
Yeah.
And the Mad Genius with the tube sticking out of his brain.
The Thinker.
Yeah, the Thinker. I didn't think he did anything except just spew out exposition.
Yeah, he was an exposition dump, but I think he is important in the sense that he shows an example of like a superpowered individual who is neither a hero or an out-and-out villain. He's kind of mixed up in the gray zone, and he's obviously, you know, he's become the hired help for this military coup, basically.
But like all of the main characters, so like Harley Quinn, Bloodsport, King Shark, even Polka Dot Man, the only reason we know they're villains is because they start off in jail, being in jail.
Right.
We never got the feeling that they were truly, you know, villainous, I guess is the word. Like the only guy who I feel that toes the line between antihero and villain is Peacemaker. And it's no coincidence to me that he's the most interesting character. I mean, King Shark, I can't possibly imagine what crime he committed. Like he raided a fish store or something. I don't know. Like,
I mean, I imagine he was eating people.
Like he's a cute man shark. I mean, what could he possibly do? There's one scene.
Now you have to admit that the movie must have won you over in some way if you can see a giant man shark as cute and lovable. I mean, you see him gnawing on people's skulls and ripping people in half in this movie.
Yeah. Okay. So, like I said, like the execution was fine. I think it was a fine film. 3 out of 5 is not a bad score.
Okay.
In my opinion.
All right.
It to me, 3 out of 5 is your movie was fine. It didn't blow me away and it didn't disappoint me. I think the problem is people thought so poorly of David Ayer's Suicide Squad that they came into this with really low expectations. And so if you come with really low expectations, then it turns out to be half decent. You kind of overrate it because it's so unexpected.
Yeah.
But maybe because I had heard so much good buzz leading into it, I was expecting something in the Guardians of the Galaxy level where I was really wowed by just the creative direction and the sort of universe that they painted, but I didn't get either of that. And maybe that's my fault for having my expectations set too high.
Do you think the gore or the R rating impacted your decision at all? Because I know, I mean, of the two of us, you like gore or you have a lower tolerance for the stuff. And I will admit, like, on the face of it, like, there's a lot of gore, there's a lot of blood, there's a lot of very gory kills in this. Like, if you have a weak stomach at all, this might be one to kind of reconsider a little bit because they don't spare anything.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It didn't lose or add any points for me. The only type of gore that really gets me is when it's too realistic, or Quentin Tarantino, where it's just like liters of blood. The Harley Quinn escape scene where they like replace some of the blood splatter with flowers.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting creative choice. The part where Man Shark rips a man in half, I thought that was actually pretty cool. There's a comic book violence to it, not like Watchmen where it seems a little realistic and too much slow-mo and a little too dark. Some of the humor here is very funny. It's meant to be that way, especially when they raid the camp. And I don't want to spoil it too much, but that was actually like a really funny highlight.
Yeah.
But yeah, like there are people in my theater who were entertained by the blood splatter and the gore. I wasn't moved either way.
Okay.
I may be dead inside, but I just don't see violence as a big pull for a movie unless it's like a Keanu Reeves John Wick type where like the choreography and the gunplay is very realistic or very cool. That's something that feels fresh.
I think it'd be fair to say that maybe Gunn was overdoing it in certain shots or sequences a little bit just to prove that he could still do it.
I get that feeling, yeah. He's
been in the Marvel world for 2 films now and coming up on a third one, you know, with the third Guardians movie in the pipeline. But prior to all of that, he worked for Troma, which was a schlock exploitation type of studio. And of course he made Slither and almost got canceled, almost got fired by Disney for some objectionable humor that he made on that he posted on Twitter about 10 years ago. So, you know, he has a background in this stuff, in this like goopy, gritty stuff. And I don't know, maybe if you were a little bit cynical about it, you could say like, okay, no, he's given the license, he's really embracing it, and that might be too much for some people, or they might not get the joke. And that's totally fair, I think.
I mean, as a frame of reference, I gave it 3 out of 5, but I also gave Black Widow 3 out of 5. I gave Tomorrow War 3 out of 5, Godzilla vs. Kong 3 out of 5. So I mean, if you were genuinely entertained by these movies, I like, by no means am I not recommending The Suicide Squad. We've got so many good superhero films right now. The Suicide Squad does not even come close to cracking the top 10 for me.
In terms of like top 10 of the year or top 10?
No, just top 10 superhero movies in general.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean,
or even top 20. Like I find it hard to list in the top 20 off the top of my head. It might come close.
It might make it into my top 20 just because I like the premise and I like the actors involved. Top 10 would be tough given, you know.
But do you know what I mean? That this film feels a little generic?
A little bit. I mean, like I said before, like I didn't laugh uproariously at the jokes in the way that I did, certainly with the first Guardians movie, because I think, you know, when the first Guardians movie came along, it was such a different flavor from the Marvel stuff we'd had up until that point. And very self-referential, which is a style of humor I like anyway. and not to mention all of the visuals and the song choices and everything. Like the complete package there was really special, I think, the overall Marvel canon. And so this comes along, and like the songs in this are different. They're a little bit more understated. I didn't find them to be as on the nose as you did, but at least in terms of like lyrics.
The cues. I think the cues were really on the nose. That's what gets me the most.
Are you thinking of like, you can see it, a music cue or a needle drop coming because it's that point in the movie where it makes sense to have one?
Yeah, basically.
Okay, so it wasn't so much like the particular songs he picked, but just like...
No, in fact, I had no problems with the songs David Ayer chose in the first Suicide
Yeah,
Squad.
I don't think he chose those songs.
My big problem was the fact that he was so on the nose with it. It was so literal in his song choice. This one, I agree with you, is a little more subdued, but it's the same problem in a lot of these movies. And I heard Cruella had the same problem too, where like you can see the musical cue coming and it's too on the nose. It is too self-referential. It's almost too self-aware. And, maybe Gunn is like a victim of his own success and that we just expect something fresh and new every time.
Yeah, well, I think the real test for him will be like assuming, Guardians 3 comes out in whenever it is, like 2023, 2024. And then he's got to turn around and make something else. And whether if he's not going to make a Guardians movie or a Suicide Squad movie, do people kind of unfairly expect him to have these sorts of like jukebox type soundtracks in everything he makes? Because I think that would be, that would be unfortunate if that was the case, because I think he can, as a filmmaker, he could probably do any sort of thing if he wanted to.
Yeah, I feel like with Guardians of the Galaxy, he just has more to play with because there's layers of plot and character in there. With this one, some of it's just thrown in there for laughs and kicks.
I will say though, like the development that they give to the core, say 5 to 7 characters is more than I expected, and more than a number of other superhero movies, especially team up movies where you don't have as much time with each character. Like by the end of this movie, you do find out about Polka Dot Man's relationship with his mother, and you find out about Bloodsport's relationship with his daughter. And
you make assumptions, especially with Polka Dot Man and his mother.
Yeah, but they give a certain amount of screen time to it, more so than I think they do to other characters of that stature in other movies, because they take him seriously to the point where, you sympathize with the fact that he was experimented on as a child by his mother, and you understand where his brain is at, and the fact that he gets a defined arc by the end is, I think, sets those characters ahead of other ones, and say, like, I don't know, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Like theatrical cut of Justice League.
Any ensemble film.
Should we talk at all before we move on about the so-called release the Ayer cut thing that's building on Twitter?
Oh, for the Suicide Squad? Or not the Suicide, for Suicide Squad?
Yeah.
I'm always interested in the director's true vision. That's why I love director's cut so much.
Right.
And that's why I still love physical media, because you can't get it on streaming unless it's like an official release. I'd be interested to really see what his cut would be like. I don't think it'll be that much better than what came out theatrically, because the theatrical version just was very weak in a lot of aspects. I fail to see how he could really improve it, other than, editing and the introduction of the characters.
Yeah, I think it would be more capably edited. I think it would obviously have fewer jokes, because that's exactly what was added in reshoots when they took him off the project in the editing bay. So you would have gotten a more serious thing, more along the lines of like End of Watch or Fury or something like his previous work. It would not have had that Guardians flavor that DC's top brass obviously wanted so much when they saw how popular the first Guardians was.
Right. And that's not to say like the first Suicide Squad was terrible. Like Deadshot got a really big fleshed out backstory. El Diablo, the guy who shoots flames or whatever, I thought he had a really interesting character arc as well. So like there are parts to me that I think are salvageable, but you can only do so much when the source material like wasn't very good.
Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, all bets are off, obviously, with these director's cuts. I spent many years disbelieving the idea that a Snyder cut would ever happen, and look where we are now.
And I'm glad we got it. I'm glad we got the Snyder cut because I think it is so much superior, and I think it's actually a very good superhero.
Ultimately, yeah. I mean, I have to agree with you. I wasn't when we talked about it a few months ago, like I wasn't as enthusiastic as you were, but still, like you have to admit that it was an improvement. And I mean, I can't say that that David Ayer is as unique a filmmaker as Snyder in terms of visuals or plotting or character. So I don't know that he's going to have the fan momentum behind him to make WB do this. I don't know.
I don't think so. If the Suicide Squad was a bomb, which it isn't, then maybe the Ayer cut would have more momentum. But because this was so good, there's no reason to go back. I mean, just continue where you left off with the Suicide Squad.
Yeah. Do you think they could improve, like they could get you to say a 4 out of 5, for example, with a follow-up to Gunn's movie, whether it was directed by Gunn or not? Like, well, do you see room for these characters or this premise to improve or grow over time, or do you think it like this was a one and done kind of thing?
I would hope that there's a sequel because I'm interested to see what they do with the characters. But I think the way they could improve it is part of the reason I think the Suicide Squad is so interesting is because these are superheroes forced to do good or quote unquote good, or forced to do the bidding of Amanda Waller. I think that's a very interesting dynamic. I think interaction between the characters is really good. I like the rivalry between the characters. I think that has plenty of legs. There are a lot of ways you can go. It needs to have more than just the Suicide Squad teaming up to defeat a CGI monster. It needs to be more than that.
Do you think there's something like, they obviously they set up the seeds of, the Suicide Squad maybe having some blackmail on the US government? Do you think it would be more interesting if they brought in kind of like that paranoid government thriller type aspect to it, where there's a B plot going on that's running underneath the overall, like, take down the big bad?
Yeah, I don't even think it needs to be a B plot. I think that can be the plot where the government is trying to control the Suicide Squad. Like, get them to do their bidding, maybe tricking them into doing their bidding, and making the Suicide Squad really reflect on their actions and what they're doing and whether or not what they're doing is worth it. So in the beginning, we had Bloodsport rejecting Amanda Waller's proposition because he doesn't want anything to do with it. But the moment she says, well, you know what? You don't do this. I'm going to throw your daughter into jail. That's a very interesting dynamic. And that's arguably the strongest push for him to be as part of the Suicide Squad than any other character.
Yeah. No, I think it's, the first movie probably overdid the amount of Amanda Waller, and this movie scales it back. So I think there's maybe...
It scales it back too much.
Yeah, because she's really not in it a whole lot, and she's even sort of like taken out temporarily partway through. So I think you could make her into more of a villain, or more of a more present as a villain, because she's obviously, she's got the hand of God, she's able to kill these people.
Yeah, she should be the big bad. And her proposition for taking 10 years off your sentence, and the criminals, these super criminals are into that. Like, that's not good enough. If anything, these super criminals are like, I can probably just break out of here, no problem anyway. What's 10 years off my sentence? Like, you really need to give them a really strong motivation. Then Harley Quinn is kind of interesting in that regard, because you never quite know what her motivation is. She's just a crazy person. So the fact that she's so willing to go along with the entire mission, just presumably because she can take 10 years off her sentence, I don't really buy that. I would find it more believable if Harley Quinn joined the Suicide Squad on her own volition because she likes blowing things up.
Right, yeah.
I think that's more in her character. I can see why a character like, what's his name? Michael Rooker, Savant. Okay, I can see why, he might want to take 10 years off his sentence. But King Shark, again, like, why does he need 10 years off his sentence? I don't know. I feel like he's not going to die. what's there to gain anyway from losing 10 years? 10 years is nothing for him, probably.
No, you're right. Like the motivations are obviously change a lot depending on who you're talking about. And Harley Quinn is kind of like a engine of fate. I mean, she doesn't really have big plans. She just kind of ends up where the winds blow her kind of thing.
Yeah. It's just, I was looking for something a little more chaotic, not visually, but the characters themselves, if that makes any sense.
Favorite ridiculous character from the Suicide Squad?
Oh, Polka Dot Man, hands down.
Really?
Yeah.
But he's sort of like a main character who persists. Like if you had to pick somebody, say from that beach raid scene, who has just got the silliest powers.
Oh,
like,
the beach scene.
Yeah. Are we talking TDK? Is he like? I mean,
I was gonna say TDK by far. I found the Weasel really annoying. Blackguard, I didn't care for. Savant, I didn't really care for. TDK, I think, had the most interesting sort of superpower and also the funniest death, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So everyone else was there just to be cannon fodder, basically. Like Mongal, Javelin, I mean, they just go and get shot up. Sorry, spoilers, but whatever,
Yeah. No, I think if I would go with TDK if we're just talking about the beach scene, but if we're talking about the movie as a whole, King Shark is my guy. I just love that guy so much.
Yeah, King Shark would be a second place to Polka Dot.
Okay, so then changing tracks completely, something that is probably the furthest thing from a high-powered Hollywood blockbuster. We've got an adaptation of a 14th century chivalric romance, The Green Knight, directed by David Lowery.
O greatest of kings, let one of your knights try to land a blow against me. Indulge me in this game.
I will meet thee.
One year hence.
Okay, so did you see my Letterboxd score for this?
I saw that you came in at a half star below me, I think. You came in at 4?
Yeah.
Out of 5?
Yeah. Okay, so this one didn't annoy you as much.
You're well within your usual margins there, so.
I struggled with this one, though.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I struggled with this one, though. I almost gave it a 3.5.
Okay.
I thought the second half of the movie redeemed the first part by a huge margin. I think it was too slow to get going. This is one of those weird movies where like the critics loved it, but the CineScore by audience was a C+, and I can totally get it. It is such a slow burn. If you're not interested in this Arthurian legend, if you're not interested in visuals, if you're looking for something that's a little more fast-paced, if you're looking for something that's more bad guy versus good guy conflict-driven, this isn't the movie for you. I can't recommend it to everyone.
No.
I do feel it runs 20 minutes too long.
And yeah.
It takes its time a little too much. There are a couple scenes where Garwin, or is it Gawain?
Gawain.
They pronounce it like 5 different ways in the film. Anyway, I'm going to go with the Sean Harris pronunciation of Garwin. There's a couple scenes where Garwin begins his journey where I felt I would have cut or made it short. But do you want to just go off on the plot first to tell people about it?
I'll try to do a quick rundown on the plot. So this is one of the very few adaptations of the aforementioned 14th century poem, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which was written by an anonymous scribe. We don't know who it was credited to. There's been centuries worth of scholars analyzing this thing over the years. One of the most well-known translations of the original Middle English is by J.R.R. Tolkien himself. And it's not hard to see some of the connective tissue between the poem and some of the stuff that would end up in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit later on. So if you are a Tolkien fan, obviously this is probably worth checking out. But it follows a up-and-coming or unproven knight played by Dev Patel, Gawain.
Garmin needs a GPS commercial.
We were introduced to him. He doesn't have any deeds to his name or any reason, but he is part of Arthur's round table. And this is a version of King Arthur who's getting on in years. He doesn't really have the physical strength or the energy anymore, but he's still king of Camelot. And he's not named as Arthur in the actual official credits of this movie, but it's pretty obvious, we are dealing with an adaptation of Arthurian legend. And one Christmas Eve, the court is gathered for a feast, and an unwelcome guest arrives, the so-called Green Knight, this towering figure who kind of looks a bit like an Ent from Lord of the Rings. He's got a huge axe, and he proposes a Christmas game where anyone present in the court can take a swing at him, a single blow, and he will accept that as long as 1 year later, that person meets him in his green chapel and receives the exact same blow in return. So Gawain, wanting to prove himself, stands up, volunteers, and chops off the Green Knight's head. And of course, the Green Knight, being this sorcery created creature, he just picks up his head and goes riding out of the hall. And then, of course, now Gawain is realizing, oh my God, I have to voluntarily offer my neck to this guy in a year's time. And so he has to go out on this quest and kind of learn a little bit about himself and how dedicated he really is to being a knight. And the quest obviously tests him in a number of ways, and you're not really sure if he's actually going to make it to the end. And there's a bit of a fake out ending, which I won't spoil, but the whole thing is meant to be a cautionary tale. It's loaded with symbolism. All the visuals obviously play into that. It's supposed to talk about, the ideals of being a knight and what it takes to be a hero. So like you said, very slow boil, not for everybody. You probably have to have some like English lit or medieval studies kind of in your background maybe to really get into it.
I feel, to enjoy a bit more, I think it helps to have that kind of background. This thing is awash with symbolism, down from like the objects to a lot of the visual colors that Lowry represents. So one of the more interesting articles I read about this film was the fact that they described Dev Patel's Gawain as a sort of millennial hero. This sort of person who whines about, not getting things even though he's never earned it. Do you buy that argument? Because I push back against that.
I would push back on it a little bit, just to say that I understand where that comes from, because obviously he puts off his obligation at first. He doesn't want to go. He's not very enthusiastic about actually leaving Camelot and going off on the quest. And he's presented with many possible outs and excuses. And I can see how like somebody could see that as like, oh, all millennials these days, they're always looking for ways to get out of things. So maybe a little bit, but I think you could go a little bit far into like stereotypes if you.
I was going to say, like, this isn't the first time we've met a protagonist who isn't dick in the first place. Like there's nothing honorable when we first meet Gawain. And maybe that throws people off a little bit because we're kind of under the assumption that all the Knights of the Round Table are honorable, capable knights. When we first meet Gawain, he's a womanizer. He visits brothels all the time. He's drunk all the time. And so when the Green Knight presents himself, Gawain sees this as a chance to increase his street cred, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and it's like the movie kind of says, well, he was very quick to jump up and volunteer for the first part of the game, but he doesn't have any follow through.
Exactly. So all he cared about was his reputation, his standing in this court of knights. Only then, later, does he learn about what it takes to earn that honor and that right to be called a Knight of the Round Table. And I think that journey is very interesting to me. It wasn't always clear that was the specific journey, though, because there was so much happening in between with the symbolism. When Gawain ends up going on his journey, he ends up meeting different people along the way. So there's the giants, the talking fox that you see in the trailer, and Joel Edgerton and Alicia Vikander as this, I don't know, this lord and his wife, I guess.
Yeah, that's all they're referred to in the credits, Lord and Lady.
Yeah, exactly. And he's tempted with sex. He's tempted with all sorts of things. There's one point where like the part with the giants where I think it's implied that he's under the influence of shrooms.
Yeah, I guess I didn't connect those two things, but yeah,
because he eats the mushrooms and then he sees the giants.
Later sees them. Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a hallucination or what it really represents symbolically. So there are moments like that where I get kind of lost.
That's an addition from the poem because he doesn't have an encounter with the female giants in the original poem. So I think they, if they decided to make a link there between him like scrambling around for mushrooms to stay alive and then later having a trip, I guess that makes sense. But I think the bit with the giants though is definitely, it throws you for a loop because it's one of the most in your face examples of like the sorcery side of what we're getting here. There's not a whole lot of magic going on, very obvious magic, but here we're presented with these like very outlandish characters. And throughout the whole movie, there's this sense of like, he's almost wandering like a post-apocalyptic landscape. And it feels like he's always late to things happening. Like there are battles happening. He comes across like the leftovers of a battle and he encounters Barry Keoghan's character. And there's always something happening off screen. And I think that, to me, that was supposed to reference the fact that like he's almost too late to become a knight.
That's an interesting read.
He's almost like running out of time before like the world moves on and doesn't care about chivalric romance or, brave knights and dragons and jousting anymore. It's like everything's passing him by. The giants, the sorcery, the magic is kind of leaving the world forever kind of thing. That was what I got from it.
I had a different read. So that's interesting.
Okay.
So my read on it was that magic and sorcery was pervasive throughout the entire thing. So it's implied that Garwin's mom is Morgan Le Fay, who is King Arthur's foe and dabbles in all sorts of weird black magic. And there are a couple scenes where there's like a Ouija board and seance kind of type deal.
Yeah. It's implied that she creates the Green Knight.
Yeah. So that was my read on it, is that somewhere underneath this like post-apocalyptic, dreary medieval landscape, there's this universe that's brimming with magic that is forcing Garwin to go on this journey of self-discovery. I don't know exactly what each represents, but I think the clearest one was the belt, the sash that he wears, the green sash.
Yep.
To me, that was probably the most interesting part of the movie, and also because it's the color green. And how it represents basically Garwin's, I guess, dedication to his cause, dedication to his mission, and the weight of it.
A little bit, but it's got a negative connotation too, because it's supposed to be enchanted and supposed to protect him from harm. And it's shown that but his attachment to that is keeping him from becoming the truly honorable knight that he theoretically wants to be.
Right. It's kind of like his safety blanket that he refuses to let go and grow up and be a man, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But then the ending kind of throws it on his head, because I guess we're going to spoilers here. I mean, okay, so in the end,
spoilers for a 14th century story.
Yeah, I mean, but if in the end, if Garwin dies, what does he gain personally? Like, people learn about him and we learn about him, but Garwin never gets to live out his days as an honorable knight.
Right.
He realizes at his time of death what honor, what having honor means and how it's earned.
Yeah.
But he never lives out that life to be an honorable knight. So I don't quite understand, why exactly is the point of, I guess, the sash and his journey for other people, I guess. I mean, does Morgan Le Fay hate her son so much that she has to teach him a lesson in which the ultimate result, no matter what, is death?
Okay, well, that's an interesting take, because this is where, again, knowing the poem actually helps you out.
Oh, okay. Please enlighten me.
This is a situation where Lowry is being ambiguous deliberately by cutting early, because he leaves it up to you whether you think Gawain actually does die at the end. He obviously, he makes the choice to abandon the sash, give up the safety blanket, and take the blow that he agreed to. But in the original poem, he does this, and the Green Knight does bring his axe down, but only gives him a small little nick on the back of the neck.
Oh yes, I read about that.
to show that that Gawain did indeed set his neck out. He abided by the bargain, and as thanks for that, the Green Knight says, "Okay, I'm not going to kill you. You can return to Camelot. You can have the story." And then Gawain ends up wearing the green sash or the belt later on as a symbol of like how he was tempted but resisted temptation.
So that makes a lot more sense. I wish that original ending was kept in there. I did read that Lowry did film an ending, and he was kind of ambiguous too. But I think that he did film an ending, a much clearer ending, where Garwin does get his head chopped off.
Okay, yeah, and that obviously then that would flip it from the original poem ending. So I mean that would have been a choice too.
So I guess the decision is: does Garwin die as an honorable knight, even when no one really knows his story anyway, because he dies alone, or does Garwin live out his days as a dishonorable knight, bring down the entire kingdom, and die a very horrific death? That's kind of like the two choices he's presented with, right?
The third choice is to abandon the belt and accept what's coming to him, whether he dies or not, and have the honor one way or the other. Because ultimately, one of the main themes of the poem is to pursue this like ideal of bravery and honor above everything else, whether you live or die. And this movie kind of questions that and says, well, I mean, there's all sorts of complicating factors, and maybe you want to hang out with Alicia Vikander, or maybe you want to have sex with the other Alicia Vikander, or, there's all these competing things. Now, did you ever see A Ghost Story, David Lowery's film from...
No, I have not. I've been meaning to, but...
And this is where I think, like, being a huge lover of that movie, like, I mean, that's like a 4.5, 5 out of 5 for me all the time, but again, it is like this movie. It's very slow, and you'd be hard pressed during huge chunks of it to know what the point is or where it's going or what you're meant to take away from it. You really do have to be in the right mood for it. You have to be in a kind of a very patient, contemplative mood for A Ghost Story. And I think Lowery is kind of bringing those same ideas and that kind of that vibe to bear on The Green Knight too. Like
100%,
especially that first section. You mean like the Gawain setting out on his journey is very much like Casey Affleck under the sheet in A Ghost Story, where he's like, that movie is like, there's 45 minutes of just like Casey Affleck standing around in the house where his character used to live, watching other people buy the house, move in, move out. And you're like, okay, this is just, so the story is like time.
Yeah. So there's a strong Terrence Malick sort of vibe there, right? Like it's people doing everyday normal things, visually interesting, but narratively really, really fucking boring.
If the medieval stuff or the poem stuff wasn't enough, like you got that vibe on top of it. So yeah, you do have to go in with this with a bit of a critical eye or a bit of consideration.
And like Malick, when it's boring, it's really boring. But when it's good, it's really good. That last hour, I really flirted with 3.5 because the first hour really kind of turned me off. I swear to God, I was drifting asleep at some point. I feel like this film is going to be really interesting come award season.
I don't expect it to go very high in the big categories, but like production design, I mean, come on, this is like a instant nomination.
Right, but I mean, the critics loved it so much. It feels like a film that film critics must need to like to have some sort of cred. Like if you're a film critic and you're like, this film sucks, people are going to be like, well, you have no idea what makes a good film.
Right. That's a good point.
And I feel like sometimes you get that pressure. It's kind of like if you like a Michael Bay or Zack Snyder film, you're not a good film critic. There's that kind of weird sort of gatekeeping.
Yeah. You got to pick the art house stuff and balance it with the mass market stuff. Otherwise, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. The production design is excellent. I thought the cinematography was great, but it's just not complete and entertaining enough for me to be one of the better films of the year so far, at least. I mean, we're late 2021, but we've got a lot of stuff coming up.
Maybe to close things out, we'll do a quick little segment on Zola. Now, this is a movie that I don't have the benefit of your Letterboxd score to go in on, so I honestly have no idea what you think of this movie.
Oh, I don't even know what I scored. I think I scored it 3.5. Let me look it up real quick.
Okay, well, I went predictably half star above you, so I went 4 out of 5. And
I only gave it a 3.
Oh, okay. All right. So, and now, interestingly enough, this isn't despite being a total change in genre, it's another A24 release. So we're getting two A24s for your money in this podcast.
This was a really interesting movie to me as well. So again, just because I give a film 3 out of 5, that's still a thumbs up. Doesn't mean I hate it. Yada, yada, yada. I know I can be a little harsh, but that's where I landed. I did flirt with 3.5 on this one. You'll find that depending on my mood, I might go up or down half a star. So, I mean, Rob and I are pretty much in line most of the time. It's just whether or not I feel... I shouldn't say whether or not I feel happy that day, but there are certain things that I would emphasize over in certain films over others. So Zola is a film that I remember talking about, I think like a year and a half ago.
Yeah, you put it on your most anticipated list, which we've featured on the front page of the site for a solid year.
Yeah, so this was a Twitter thread that was a bizarre story about how a stripper gets roped into this weekend in Florida and ends up getting involved in like a murder plot, a drug deal, all sorts of shady characters.
Human trafficking.
Yeah, human trafficking. And this was all spelled out in a long Twitter thread, and it was eventually made into a movie starring Riley Keough and Taylor Page.
We just met yesterday and you're already trying to take hoe trips together?
Be ready by 2.
You want to hear a story about how me and this bitch fell out? It's kind of long, but it's full of suspense.
You want to go somewhere with me?
That's my place.
My thing about this movie is it was lacking in certain respects. The one thing that it lacks the most is a proper ending.
Yep.
This movie is about two people getting pushed into the most wacky sequences, wacky situations over a weekend, and it just kind of resolves itself. There are certain points where the characters better each other, sabotage each other, but going from point A to point B, I'm not sure anyone changes all that much. The problem with this film for me is that part of it is just the original source material itself. When we put something online, it's just kind of there, and it's there for people to react. So part of the story of any social media story is how people react to it. We never got this sense from this film. I think it literally follows the events of the Twitter thread, but it doesn't really show how other people react to it and what the bigger meaning of all this is. So that's why I think the ending was really important, because we should be told, at least in some way, how to feel about this. And we do in a certain sense. We get told how to feel about Riley Keough's character. Zola is kind of a protagonist in this case, I guess, but it's just kind of there. It just kind of exists. The characters exist, the plot exists, but there's no real change. The Twitter thread is just a Twitter thread in itself. It could just stay there and not be a story at all unless someone does something to it.
Right. That's an excellent point. The closest they get to any kind of like interaction, which I guess you could argue is like the point of Twitter, is social interaction. The closest they get to like an opposite viewpoint is a brief little scene where you get Riley Keough's character's perspective, she claims, on what happened. And it was drawn from something that the original person posted on Reddit after the Zola thread blew up on Twitter. And I guess this person wanted to defend herself or correct the record or whatever.
Right.
And
right.
the movie encourages you to see Zola as the one who's telling the truth, or the closest thing to the truth, and Riley Keough's character as just sort of trying to cover her ass or something. But yeah, you don't get the common people, the user's reaction to what's going on. I don't remember the timeline. Like, did she post the entirety of the thread after she was safe at home, or was she starting to tweet it out while she was on the road?
I can't remember, but it was very interesting how the director Janicza Bravo ended up adapting this material. So anytime Zola picks up the phone, you hear that Twitter sound, that tweet sound. I thought that was an interesting tool. I don't really know if it was needed. The only thing that it reinforced was the fact that this was a story based off a Twitter thread.
Yeah, you probably could have cut back on that sound effect a little bit.
Or just like, what was the point of showing its a Twitter thread if you're not going to also show the reactions to it?
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's an interesting creative choice. I think it's a clever way to introduce social media in films rather than having like those digital text boxes show up while they're texting. I feel like that's my biggest pet peeve of the movies these days is when they show like the little text box with the text.
Yeah. I remember liking it. I was a sucker for it the first few times I saw it, and yeah, but it's become a tired trope now. Like there was a Jason Reitman movie that was savaged by critics that I actually came to the defense of. It's called Men, Women, and Children. Used that exact visual trope throughout the entire movie, and I remember thinking it was cool at the time. But I imagine if I went back now and watched it, it would be pretty cringy. Do you think it's kind of like that video game movie problem where you know how in a video game movie we get kind of like less excitement out of the movie version because we're not controlling the character or like telling the character where to go or to, you know, go into combat or solve a puzzle or something like that. And this is kind of, I feel like this is kind of similar in the sense that the experience of reading a epic thread like the one the movie is based on is a very personal experience to you. Like you open the first tweet, you start reading through, you see all the tweets that follow, you're like, oh my God, and you're just reading one after the other. And then probably in between, you're seeing people reply to it and memes and reactions to it. So to then kind of zoom out like this movie does and kind of take the third person perspective is maybe it takes away the interactivity a little bit like it does in a video game movie.
I don't think that's what killed video game movies or killed Zola.
Okay.
They're kind of separate, but I think what kills video games movies is how generic and dumb they tend to be.
No, but that's the point. Like the stories in video game movies are often generic because the ones in games are generic. The difference being you're in control, quote unquote, of the story in a video game movie to the extent that the game developers allow you to be.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point.
Because every first person shooter is just like you go into a level, you kill a bunch of bad guys, you get to the end without dying, you know?
Yeah, I know. It's like you got to save the world from nuclear disaster or something like that. It's always the same.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, you might have a point there. Yeah, the worst thing to say about this movie is that it simply exists because it can. The best thing you could say about this movie is that it's a very experimental movie that really succeeds in some parts, but it's an experimental movie in the sense that it's adapting something from social media that we don't really see that. Usually it's a movie about social media, but not the posts or the threads themselves.
Yeah, because usually, you know, if you try to capture social media in a direct way in a movie, it dates the movie instantly and it doesn't really hold up very well.
Well, yeah. And like a lot of the movies focus on the founding of social media. So like the social network or like what happens with people who control social media. So like Ingrid Goes West.
Or Don Cheadle in Space Jam 2.
Did you watch Space Jam?
No, I didn't. I just know enough about the terribleness of that movie to drop a reference there.
Oh, okay. I've still yet to watch it. I'm looking forward to it, actually, just to make fun of it. But you know what I mean? Like, a post itself doesn't really spawn a movie most of the time.
Yeah, totally. And it like, there's probably lots of people out there who would question whether there's enough material in any social media post to merit an entire movie or show.
That's totally sums up my thoughts. Like, does this merit a movie? And I mean, it like they did end up making a movie out of it that was, you know, kind of entertaining. So kudos to them. But like I said, the worst thing you can say about this movie is that it simply exists.
So that about does it for this episode. As always, we ask you to subscribe to the show if you're enjoying it. You want regular updates when we post new episodes. And give us a little rating so that other people can find the show. You got to feed the almighty algorithm, after all. And if you'd like more detail on The Green Knight, you can head over to kinetoscope.ca where I've got a full review posted. So until the next episode, my name is Robert Snow in Toronto.
And my name is Jason Chen in Vancouver. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.